On Thanksgiving Day, my daughter-in-law threw a plate at my face after I refused to let her parents move into my house. "You selfish old egoist," she screamed, while my own son added, "Do not call me your son anymore." I wiped the blood from my cheek, just smiled, got up and called my brother. "Everything is just as you said. Activate the plan." 20 minutes later, they lost absolutely everything. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. The sound of shattering porcelain was louder than I expected. It was a sharp, violent crack that silenced the Thanksgiving football game playing on the television in the background. A split second later, I felt the sting. It was a hot, sharp, burning sensation right above my left eyebrow, followed immediately by the warm trickle of blood running down into my eye. I did not move. I did not yell. I simply sat there, at the head of the mahogany dining table, and looked down at the jagged shards of white and gold china scattered across the turkey and the green bean casserole. It was a piece of the Lenox collection my late wife had bought 40 years ago. We had saved for 6 months to buy that set. We only used it for special occasions. Today was supposed to be a special occasion, but instead it had become a crime scene. "You are a selfish old bastard, George!" The scream came from the other end of the table. Megan, my daughter-in-law, was standing, her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated, ugly rage. Her hand was still extended, trembling slightly from the force of the throw. She was breathing heavily, her chest heaving beneath her silk blouse. "Look at you," she spat, pointing a manicured finger at me. "You live in this massive ancient museum all by yourself. 5 bedrooms. George, 5 empty, useless bedrooms gathering dust while my parents are sleeping in a motel on the highway, and you have the audacity to say no." I slowly took the linen napkin from my lap and pressed it against my forehead. The white fabric turned red instantly. I looked through my good eye at my son Bradley. He was sitting to my right. He was 38 years old, but in that moment he looked like a terrified child. He was staring at his plate, refusing to meet my gaze. He was wearing a cashmere sweater I knew he could not afford, and a watch that cost more than my first car. "Bradley," I said, my voice calm, but carrying a weight that usually made structural engineers nervous. "Are you going to let your wife assault your father in his own home?" Bradley finally looked up, but his eyes were not filled with concern or apology. They were filled with a weak, pathetic defiance. He looked at Megan, then at her parents sitting across from him, and finally at me. "She is right, Dad," Bradley said, his voice cracking slightly, before finding a false strength. "You are being unreasonable. Hank and Linda are family. They are going through a rough patch. You have the space. You have the money. Why do you have to be such a miser?" "A rough patch." I repeated the words, tasting like ash in my mouth. "Is that what we are calling felony fraud charges in Florida these days?" Megan slammed her hands onto the table, rattling the silverware. "Shut up," she shrieked. "Do not you dare talk about my parents like that. They are business people who had bad luck. But you would not understand that, would you? You just sit here on your pile of old money judging everyone." She took a breath, her eyes narrowing into slits. "Here is the deal, George. This is not a request anymore. My parents are moving into the second-floor suite tonight. They need a place to lay low and get back on their feet. You are going to give us the spare keys, and you are going to clear out your wife's old sewing room so my mother has a place to relax." I looked at Hank and Linda. They were sitting there watching the scene unfold with a detached arrogance, as if they were watching a reality show. Hank was already chewing on a drumstick again, grease shining on his chin. Linda was sipping my wine, looking at the curtains as if measuring them for replacement. "And if I refuse?" I asked quietly. "Then you are dead to us," Bradley interrupted. He stood up, trying to loom over me, but he just looked slouchy and soft. "If you do not let them move in right now, do not call me your son anymore. We will walk out that door, and we will cut you off completely. No calls, no holidays. You will die alone in this big house just like you deserve. The blood was starting to drip onto my collar. I felt a coldness spread through my chest. It was not fear. It was not even sadness anymore. It was the feeling of a structural engineer realizing that a building he had spent 30 years maintaining was rotten to the core. The foundation was gone. There was nothing left to save. It was time for a controlled demolition. I looked at my son. I looked at the woman he married. I looked at the violence and the greed in their eyes. "Is that your final answer, Bradley?" I asked. "Yes," he hissed. "Fix this or lose us." I watched Hank reach across the table with a fork and stab a piece of roasted potato from the serving platter. He did not ask. He did not say, "Excuse me." He just took it. That small action told me everything I needed to know about the people invading my home. "Nice place you got here, George," Hank said with his mouth full. "Little drafty, though. We will probably need to crank up the heat once we get settled upstairs. Linda gets cold easily." Linda nodded, taking another long sip of the wine. It was a vintage Cabernet Sauvignon, a bottle I had been saving for my 75th birthday. It cost $500. She was drinking it like it was grape juice from a box. "We will need to change the wallpaper in that guest suite," she said, waving her glass around. "That floral pattern is hideous, very dated. But we can make do for a few months until we get our settlement money." They had already mentally moved in. They had brought 3 large suitcases with them, leaving them in the hallway. I had assumed they were just traveling heavy for the holiday, but now I realized it was a planned invasion. They never intended to leave. Megan sat back down, looking satisfied with her husband's ultimatum. She picked up her wine glass and swirled it, staring at me with a smirk. "And do not think you can leverage Leo against us," she said casually, dropping the atomic bomb. Leo was my 4-year-old grandson. He was the only bright spot in this entire dysfunctional mess. He was currently at a daycare center nearby because Megan had claimed he was too rowdy for a sit-down dinner. "What about Leo?" I asked, the napkin still pressed to my bleeding head. Megan leaned forward, her eyes glinting with malice. "If we walk out that door today, George, you will never see him again. I will make sure of it. I will tell him his grandfather died. I will block your number. I will get a restraining order if you try to come near his school. You will be a stranger to him, a ghost. Unless you sign the papers." "What papers?" She pulled a folded document from her purse and slid it across the table, avoiding the gravy stains. "Just a simple residency agreement," she said, smiling. "It gives my parents rights to reside here for 24 months rent-free, and a temporary power of attorney for Bradley to handle household expenses, since you are clearly getting too old to manage a property this size. We do not want you forgetting to pay the electric bill, do we?" I looked at the document. It was not drafted by a lawyer. It looked like something they had downloaded off the internet and modified. But the intent was clear. It was the first step in a hostile takeover. First, they move in. Then they take control of the bills. Then they declare me incompetent. Then they own everything. Hank burped loudly. "Pass the salt, would you, George?" he grunted. I looked at the salt shaker. It was silver and antique. I looked at Bradley. He was busy pouring more wine for Linda, ignoring the fact that his wife was blackmailing his father with his son. "You brought luggage," I observed, my voice flat. "Yeah," Linda said. "It is in the hall. Bradley said you would not mind. We are family after all. What is mine is yours, right, George?" The sheer entitlement was breathtaking. They were not asking for help. They were demanding tribute. They viewed me not as a person, but as a resource, a gold mine that had outlived its usefulness and needed to be strip-mined. I felt a strange calm settle over me. It was the clarity that comes when the last bit of hope evaporates. For years, I had made excuses for Bradley. I had bailed out his failed startups. I had paid off his credit cards. I had tolerated Megan S. snide comments. I had done it all for Leo, and because I promised my wife on her deathbed that I would look after our boy. But the boy I raised was gone. The man sitting next to me was a stranger, a parasite who would watch me bleed out at the dinner table rather than stand up to his wife. I looked at the clock on the mantel. It was 1:45 in the afternoon. My brother Leonard would be waiting by his phone. We had discussed this possibility weeks ago, but I had prayed we would never have to execute it. Leonard always told me I was too soft. He told me that one day they would cross a line I could not ignore. Throwing a plate at my face was that line. Threatening to erase me from my grandson's life was the declaration of war. I pushed my chair back. The legs scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. "Where are you going?" Megan snapped. "We are not done here. Sign the paper, George." I stood up fully. I am 6'2". Even at 73 years old, I still have the broad shoulders of a man who built skyscrapers for a living. I looked down at them, and for a brief second, I saw a flicker of doubt in Megan's eyes. "I need to use the restroom," I said, "and I need to clean up this blood." "Do not take too long," Bradley muttered, not looking at me. "We have dessert coming, and we need to move the bags up before the game starts." I did not reply. I walked out of the dining room past the suitcases lined up in the hallway, like invading soldiers, and into the powder room under the stairs. I locked the door and turned on the faucet. I let the water run cold. I looked at myself in the mirror. The cut was jagged just below the hairline. It was bleeding freely, but it was not deep enough for stitches. It would scar, though. A permanent reminder of this Thanksgiving. I washed the blood away. The water swirled pink in the white basin. I dried my face with a fresh towel. I stared into my own eyes in the mirror. I saw the grief there, the years of loneliness since my wife passed. But beneath the grief, I saw something else. I saw the steel that had allowed me to negotiate contracts with unions in New York and Chicago. I saw the man who owned the patents to structural steel components used in half the buildings in Manhattan. They thought I was just a retired engineer living on a pension. They thought this house was my only asset. They had no idea. I pulled my phone from my pocket. My hands were steady. I dialed the number. It rang once. "Yeah." Leonard's voice was gravelly and sharp. He did not do pleasantries. I looked at my reflection one last time. "It is time, Leonard," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "Did they do it?" Leonard asked. She threw a plate at me. "Drawn blood. They are demanding residency for the grifters, and they threaten to take Leo away forever." There was a silence on the other end. A dangerous, heavy silence. Leonard had been an insurance fraud investigator for 30 years before retiring. He knew how to destroy people legally, efficiently, and totally. "Okay," Leonard said. "The nuclear option." "Are you sure, George? Once we pull this trigger, there is no going back. Bradley will be ruined." "He is already ruined," I said. "He just does not know it yet. He made his choice. Activate the package." "Copy that," Leonard said. "I am making the calls. The repo team is 2 miles out. The sheriff is on standby for the warrant execution. And I am freezing the accounts now." "How long?" I asked. 20 minutes, Leonard replied. "Sit tight. Do not sign anything." "And George?" "Yeah. Happy Thanksgiving, brother." I hung up the phone. I put it back in my pocket. I straightened my tie. I checked the cut on my forehead one last time. It had stopped bleeding. I unlocked the door and walked back into the hallway. I could hear them laughing in the dining room. Hank was telling a loud story about how he almost closed a deal in Miami before the feds got involved. Megan was laughing that high, fake laugh she used when she thought she had won. They were celebrating. They thought they had broken the old man. They thought they had secured their golden parachute. I walked back into the dining room. They all looked up. "Well," Megan said, holding out the pen, Did you come to your senses? I walked to the head of the table. I did not sit down. I placed my hands on the back of my chair and looked at each of them in turn. I looked at Hank and Linda, the parasites. I looked at Megan, the predator. I looked at Bradley, the coward. I smiled. It was not a nice smile. You have 20 minutes, I said. Megan frowned, confusion clouding her face. 20 minutes for what? To sign the paper? No, I said, checking my watch. You have 20 minutes to finish that turkey. You have 20 minutes to drink that wine. Because in exactly 20 minutes, this is no longer my house. And it certainly is not yours. What are you talking about, you old fool? Bradley snapped. Enjoy the meal, I said. It is the last free thing you are ever going to get from me. I sat down, picked up my fork, and took a bite of the stuffing. It was cold. But revenge, I knew, was a dish best served exactly like this. The room went silent again, but this time the silence was different. It was the silence of the tide going out just before the tsunami hits. They did not know what was coming, but for the first time that afternoon, they looked afraid. Tick-tock, I thought as I chewed. Tick-tock! I closed the heavy oak door of my study and turned the deadbolt. The solid click of the steel lock sliding into place was the most satisfying sound I had heard all day. It was a heavy industrial-grade lock, the kind used to secure server rooms or high-security vaults, not a standard residential privacy lock. To the untrained eye, this room was just a dusty old home office filled with drafting tables and rolls of yellowing paper. To my family, it was the boring den where Grandpa spent his time tinkering with his little drawings. They never bothered to come in here. They thought it smelled like old man and graphite. They had no idea that this room was the nerve center of an empire they did not even know existed. I walked over to the large framed schematic hanging behind my desk. It was a technical drawing of the Sullivan tensile node, a structural steel component I had invented 30 years ago. It looked like a simple piece of metal, but it revolutionized how skyscrapers handle wind shear. I swung the frame away from the wall, revealing the biometric safe embedded in the concrete. I placed my thumb on the scanner. A green light flashed and the heavy steel door hissed open. Inside, there were no stacks of cash or gold bars like in the movies. There was something far more valuable. I pulled out a thick leather binder and opened it on my desk. Inside were the patent documents. U.S. Patent Number 74921. U.S. Patent Number 8830. The paperwork that proved I was not just a retired engineer living on a fixed pension and Social Security. I ran my hand over the embossed seals. Bradley and Megan thought I was scraping by on a few $1,000s a month. They thought this house was my only asset, a liability that drained my meager savings. They had no idea that every time a new high-rise went up in New York, Chicago, or Dubai, a royalty check was deposited into a trust account in the Cayman Islands. $150,000 a month. That was the passive income generated by my patents last month alone. I had accumulated a net worth of over $18 million while wearing flannel shirts and driving a 6-year-old Ford truck. I did it to protect them. I wanted Bradley to build his own character, to learn the value of a dollar without the crutch of a trust fund. I wanted him to be a man, not a parasite. I looked at the documents and felt a wave of nausea. My experiment in parenting had been a catastrophic failure. By hiding the wealth, I had not taught him humility. I had only made him hungry and resentful. I had created a weak man who married a predator because he was too lazy to hunt for himself. I put the binder back in the safe. Next to it was a small velvet box containing my late wife's engagement ring. It was a 3-carat flawless diamond, not the cubic zirconia Megan thought it was. She had made fun of it once, calling it a piece of costume jewelry. I gently closed the safe and spun the lock. It was time to see what the rats were doing in the maze. I sat down in my leather executive chair and woke up the computer monitors. 4 large screens flickered to life, displaying a grid of high-definition video feeds. I had installed the security system 5 years ago after a break-in down the street, but I never told Bradley or Megan about the interior cameras. I liked my privacy, and I liked knowing what happened in my house when I was not in the room. I leaned forward, staring at the screen labeled Dining Room. They were still there, but the mood had shifted. The arrogance was replaced by a nervous energy. Bradley was pacing back and forth, his hands in his hair. He looked like a man who had just bet his life savings on a horse that broke its leg at the starting gate. I switched the view to the living room camera. My blood pressure spiked. Hank, my daughter-in-law's father, was standing in front of my antique liquor cabinet. It was a piece I had inherited from my own father, a beautiful rosewood cabinet with a locking glass front. Hank was jamming something into the lock. I zoomed in. It was a butter knife he had taken from the dining table. "Come on, you cheap old goat," he muttered, the microphone picking up his voice clearly. "Open up." He was trying to pry the door open, scratching the wood in the process. He wanted the bottle of 25-year-old scotch I kept on the top shelf. He did not care about the furniture or the history. He just wanted to consume. He was a termite eating away at the structure of my life. I watched as the wood splintered. He laughed a wet, hacking sound and pulled the bottle out. He did not bother with a glass. He unscrewed the cap and took a long swig, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. I shifted my gaze to the camera covering the hallway. Megan was there. She was not eating. She was on a mission. She was moving methodically, opening the drawers of the entry console, rifling through the mail I had left there. She was looking for bank statements. She was looking for credit card bills. She was looking for anything that would give her leverage or access. She pulled out a letter from the utility company and threw it on the floor in disgust. Then she moved to the coat closet. She began going through the pockets of my trench coat. She found a few loose bills and shoved them into her bra. It was pathetic. It was a violation so casual and practiced that I knew it was not the first time she had done this. How many times had she gone through my medicine cabinet when she used the bathroom? How many times had she snooped through my dresser when I was in the garden? I looked at the screen again. Linda Megan's mother was wandering into the living room, holding a glass of my wine. She stopped in front of a painting, an original oil landscape of the Connecticut coast I had bought at an auction 10 years ago. She reached out and touched the canvas with her greasy fingers, tapping it. "I bet this is worth a few grand," she shouted to Hank. "We could sell it on eBay. Get some cash for the lawyer fees." Hank grunted from the liquor cabinet. "Sell it all. The old man will not need it in the nursing home." The nursing home. They were already planning the liquidation. They had not even gotten me out of the house yet, and they were already pricing the fixtures. I felt a cold rage settle in my gut. It was a familiar feeling, the same focus I used to feel when a project was going off the rails, and I had to step in and fix the engineering before the whole structure collapsed. I checked the time on my computer screen. 12 minutes had passed. They had 8 minutes left. I opened my email client. A secure message from Leonard was waiting in my inbox. The subject line was simply "the dossier." I clicked it open. Leonard had been busy. My brother was a former forensic accountant for the IRS before he moved into private fraud investigation. He did not just find dirt, he found the entire landfill. I scanned the PDF attached to the email. It was a comprehensive financial autopsy of my son and his in-laws. The first page was about Bradley's company, Quantum Solutions, LLC. It sounded impressive. He told me it was a tech startup developing AI algorithms for logistics. I had given him seed money 3 years ago, $50,000 to get it off the ground. He sent me quarterly reports showing slow but steady growth. The report on my screen told a different story. Quantum Solutions had been dissolved by the state 18 months ago for failure to pay taxes. The company did not exist. The office address he listed was a UPS store mailbox. The seed money was gone, spent on leasing a Porsche and trips to Cabo. But it was worse. Bradley had taken out a business loan using my social security number as a guarantor. He had forged my signature. The loan was in default. The bank had sent demand letters, but they had gone to the UPS box. He had committed identity theft against his own father. I scrolled down. The section on Hank and Linda was even more colorful. They were not just bad with money, they were career criminals. Active warrants in Florida for timeshare fraud. A civil judgment in Ohio for selling fake insurance policies to the elderly. They had filed for bankruptcy 4 times in 3 different states, using slight variations of their names. And Megan, my dear daughter-in-law. Leonard had found her secret bank account. She had been siphoning money from Bradley's accounts for years, funneling it to her parents to pay their legal bills. But the kicker was the withdrawal history. Last week, she had withdrawn $10,000 from a joint account she shared with Bradley. The memo line on the check said daycare tuition, but Leo's daycare only cost $2,000 a month. Where did the other $8,000 go? I looked at the transaction trace Leonard had performed. The money had been wired to a casino in Atlantic City. She was gambling. They were all gambling with my money, with my life, with my grandson's future. I looked back at the security monitors. Hank was now sitting in my recliner, his feet up on the coffee table, boots still on, drinking my scotch. Linda was taking a selfie in front of the painting. Megan was back in the dining room, whispering furiously into Bradley's ear, pointing at the ceiling towards my office. They were getting impatient. They realized I was taking too long. I saw Bradley stand up. He grabbed a heavy brass candlestick from the sideboard. He weighed it in his hand. "He is locked in there," Megan said, her voice coming through the speakers, tinny but clear. "Go get him. Break the door down if you have to. He is probably calling the cops." Bradley looked at the candlestick, then at the stairs. "If he called the cops, we need to get the jump on him," Hank shouted from the living room. "Tell them he attacked you. Scratch your face, Megan. Make it look like a struggle." I watched in horror as Megan raised her hand and raked her nails down her own cheek, leaving angry red welts. "Do it, Bradley!" she screamed. "Go get the old bastard!" Bradley started walking toward the stairs. He was coming for me, and he was armed. I closed the safe file on my computer. I did not need to see any more. The structural integrity was 0. The collapse was imminent. I picked up the phone on my desk and dialed Leonard again. "They are coming up," I said. "I know," Leonard replied. "I am watching the feed too. I gave you access, remember? The cavalry is 2 minutes out. Do not open the door until you hear the sirens." I hung up. I stood up and straightened my jacket. I looked at the schematic of the Sullivan tensile node one last time. It was designed to withstand hurricane-force winds to bend without breaking. Today, I would find out if I was built the same way. I heard the heavy footsteps in the hallway outside, then the violent pounding on the door. "Open up, Dad," Bradley shouted. "We are done playing games." I looked at the heavy oak door. It did not budge. "I am done playing too, son," I whispered. Then I sat back down and waited for the sound of the sirens. I turned my chair away from the shaking door and forced my eyes back to the glowing monitors. The pounding outside was getting rhythmic, a steady, violent thud that vibrated through the floorboards. But inside the digital fortress of my computer screen, the silence was absolute, and the truth was screaming. I needed to see the rest. I needed to understand the full architecture of this disaster before the wood finally splintered and the wolves broke in. I clicked on the subfolder labeled Bradley Sullivan Financials. Leonard had organized it with the cold precision of a forensic accountant, but to me it looked like an autopsy report of my son's morality. I had known for 2 years that Bradley was in trouble. That was why I had set up the blind trust. That was why I had created the shell company named Phoenix Ventures. When Bradley started bragging about his new angel investor who believed in his vision, I never corrected him. I never told him that the anonymous benefactor wiring $5,000 a month to keep his office lights on was the same father he mocked for clipping coupons. I had been paying his rent, his server costs, and his payroll for 24 months. I did it because I remembered the little boy who used to build Lego towers in this very room, and I could not bear to see his adult dreams collapse. But as I scrolled through the transaction logs Leonard had uncovered, the bile rose in my throat. The money I sent to Phoenix Ventures was not going to server costs. It was not going to developers. It was going into a kaleidoscopic washing machine of illicit transactions. There were wire transfers from shell corporations in Estonia and Cyprus hitting Bradley's business account every Friday. Then, within hours, that money was moved out, broken into smaller chunks, and sent to accounts linked to online gambling sites and cryptocurrency exchanges. My son was not a tech entrepreneur. He was a mule. I opened a document titled Risk Assessment. Leonard had flagged a series of payments to a local entity called North Star Logistics. It sounded legitimate enough until I read Leonard's notes in the margin. North Star is a front for the Russo crime syndicate out of Newark. They run loan sharking and protection rackets. Bradley borrowed $50,000 from them 2 years ago to impress Megan. He couldn't pay the vigorish. They turned him into a laundromat. I stared at the screen, my hand covering my mouth. The structural failure was so much deeper than I had imagined. Bradley was not just incompetent. He was compromised. He was cleaning dirty money for mobsters to keep his kneecaps intact. And the worst part was that even with the criminal income, he was still drowning. I saw the record of a payment I had made just last month. It was a $10,000 injection I had authorized from my blind trust, thinking it was for a software license renewal. The transaction trace showed it went directly to North Star Logistics. I had been paying the mob. I had been subsidizing my son's servitude to criminals, thinking I was investing in his future. The banging on the door stopped for a moment. I heard muffled arguing in the hallway. Megan was screaming at Bradley to use his shoulder. Hank was yelling about a crowbar in the garage. I clicked on the next folder, the one labeled The In-Laws. If Bradley was a tragedy, Hank and Linda were a horror movie. I had always known they were slippery. The way Hank wouldn't look you in the eye, the way Linda constantly assessed the value of everything in a room. But I had assumed they were just garden-variety grifters, the kind who cheat on their taxes and return used clothes. Leonard's file revealed they were predators of the worst kind. The PDF opened with a mugshot. It was Hank 10 years younger, but with the same greasy smirk. The charge was wire fraud in Arizona. But that was just the appetizer. The main course was a federal indictment unsealed 3 days ago in Florida. Operation Sunset, the document header read. Hank and Linda were the architects of a massive timeshare scheme targeting retirees. They had set up a fake real estate brokerage called Golden Horizon Properties. They cold-called seniors people, exactly my age, veterans, widows, people living on fixed incomes. They promised to buy their unwanted timeshares for triple the market value. All the victims had to do was wire a closing fee or a tax transfer fee up front, $2,000 here, $5,000 there. I scrolled through the list of victims Leonard had attached. There were hundreds of names. Mary Jenkins, age 78, loss of $8,000. Robert Cohen, age 82, loss of $12,000. Eleanor Rigby, age 75, loss of her entire savings. They had stolen retirement funds. They had stolen the money people needed for insulin and heating oil. They had preyed on the loneliness and financial anxiety of their own generation. And they had done it all while driving leased Mercedes and drinking vintage wine. The timeline became clear with a terrifying clarity. The indictment had come down 72 hours ago. Their assets in Florida had been frozen yesterday morning. That was why they were here. That was why they were so desperate to get into my house. They were not visiting for Thanksgiving. They were on the run. My house, with its thick walls and secluded location, was not a guest suite to them. It was a safe house. They needed a place to hide where the marshals wouldn't look immediately. They needed an address that wasn't linked to their names. And they needed a new victim. I opened a subfile labeled The Megan Connection. It was a transcript of text messages Leonard had intercepted. My brother's methods were not always strictly legal, but they were effective. The texts were between Megan and her mother. Linda dated 2 days ago, Linda. The accounts are locked. We can't access the offshore funds. We need cash, Meg. We need to disappear for a while. Megan. Come to Connecticut. The old man is sitting on a gold mine. I saw his mail. He has accounts he doesn't talk about. Linda will he let us stay. Megan. He won't have a choice. We will break him. If we get residency, we can claim squatter rights. It will take months to evict us. By then, we will have access to his identity. Linda, is he senile yet? Megan. He is getting there. Or at least he will be once we start managing his meds. Just get here. Bring the sleeping pills. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. Bring the sleeping pills. They were not just planning to steal my house. They were planning to medicate me into submission. They were going to turn me into a zombie, use my identity to launder their stolen cash, and perhaps eventually help me have a tragic accident down the stairs. This was a home invasion. It was a slow-motion murder plot disguised as a family holiday. The doorknob rattled violently. The wood frame groaned under a new assault. "I know you are in there, Dad!" Bradley shouted, his voice thick with panic and bravado. "Open this door right now." Hank found the crowbar. "We are coming in." I looked at the screen one last time. I looked at the faces of the victims Hank and Linda had destroyed. I looked at the criminal record of the son I had tried so hard to save. I realized then that the man who had sat at that dining table 20 minutes ago, the man who had tried to be polite, the man who had wiped blood from his face and asked for peace, that man was dead. He had to die so I could survive. I was not a father anymore. I was a witness. I was a prosecutor. And I was the executioner. I clicked print. The laser printer in the corner hummed to life, spitting out the evidence. The indictment. The bank transfers to the mob. The text messages plotting my demise. I grabbed the warm stack of papers. I felt the weight of them. This was not just paper. This was ammunition. I walked over to the safe and took out my old heavy iron keyring, the one that held the master keys to every door in the house, including the magnetic locks on the perimeter gates. I heard the screech of metal on metal outside the door. Hank was jamming the crowbar into the frame. "Hurry up, you idiot!" Megan shrieked from the hallway. "Break it open!" I checked my watch. 18 minutes had passed since I left the table. Leonard said 20. But Leonard was always cautious. The cavalry would be here any second. I walked to the window and looked out at the driveway. It was a gray November afternoon, the sky the color of bruised iron. The wind was stripping the last dead leaves from the oak trees. And there they were. Turning off the main road, silently cutting their sirens as they approached, were 3 black SUVs and 2 state trooper cruisers. Behind them was a tow truck. Leonard had not just called the police. He had called the federal task force. I saw men in tactical gear stepping out of the SUVs. They moved with the precision of a demolition team. They were flanking the house. I turned back to the door. The wood was splintering. A crack appeared near the lock. I could see the tip of the crowbar poking through. "One more push," Hank grunted. I stood in the center of the room holding the dossier. I waited. With a deafening crack, the doorframe gave way. The door swung open, banging against the bookshelf. Bradley stood there, breathing hard, holding a brass candlestick. Hank was beside him, gripping the crowbar, his face red with exertion. Megan was behind them, her eyes wild and predatory. Linda was lurking in the shadows, holding a glass of wine. They rushed into the room. "There you are," Megan hissed. "You think you can hide from us in your own house?" "Sign the papers," George, Hank said, stepping forward, raising the crowbar slightly. "Sign them now, and maybe we won't have to get rough." I did not back away. I did not flinch. I threw the stack of papers onto the drafting table between us. They landed with a heavy slap. I suggest you read those, I said, my voice steady as a steel beam. Especially the part about the federal warrant for your arrest, Hank. Hank froze. The color drained from his face so fast, it looked like a light switch had been flipped. What did you say? He whispered. And Bradley, I continued looking at my son. Page 4. Details your money laundering for the Russo family. I stopped the payments 5 minutes ago. They will be looking for you. Bradley dropped the candlestick. It hit the floor with a dull thud. What have you done? He gasped. I walked past them towards the shattered door. They were too stunned to stop me. I stopped in the doorway and looked back. I didn't do anything, I said. I just turned on the lights. From downstairs, the sound of the front door being rammed open by a battering ram shook the entire house. FBI federal agents shouted from the foyer, "Everybody down. Now." I looked at Megan. Her arrogance had evaporated, replaced by the primal terror of a trapped animal. "Happy Thanksgiving," I whispered. Then I stepped into the hallway and watched the world they had built on lies crumble into dust. The second hand on my grandfather clock swept past the 12, marking the end of the 20 minutes. The deadline had passed. The silence from the hallway was heavy and suffocating, like the air before a thunderstorm. I stood in the center of my study, my eyes fixed on the heavy oak door that separated my sanctuary from the wolves. I had built this house to be a fortress, a place of safety for my family, but now the walls felt like they were closing in. "George, open this door right now." It was Megan. Her voice had lost its veneer of polite condescension. It was raw, shrill, and vibrating with panic. She had realized finally that I was not bluffing. She knew that I was not just a stubborn old man sulking in his study. The silence from my end terrified her more than any shouting match could have. She knew I was making moves, and for a control freak like Megan, the loss of control was a fate worse than death. I stayed silent. I did not move. I simply watched the door, waiting for the inevitable escalation. "He is not opening it, Bradley," she screamed. "He is calling someone. I know it. He is cutting us off. Do something." I heard the heavy thud of bodies against the wood, but the deadbolt held firm. It was a solid steel throw embedded deep into the reinforced frame. They could shoulder it all day, and they would only bruise themselves. "We need something heavier," I heard Hank grunt. "The crowbar is not enough. The wood is too thick." There was a pause, a scrambling of footsteps, and then a sound that made my heart ache more than the cut on my forehead. It was the sound of something being ripped from the wall in the hallway. I knew exactly what it was. Mounted on the wall just outside my office was a vintage fire axe. It was a retirement gift from the New York Fire Department, presented to me after I consulted on the structural reinforcement of several historic firehouses in the city. It was a beautiful piece with a polished hickory handle and a heavy red-painted steel head. It was meant to be a symbol of protection, of saving lives. Now my son was going to use it to destroy his father. "Bradley, do not," I heard Linda say, but her voice was weak, lacking any real conviction. "Give it to me," Bradley snarled. His voice was unrecognizable. It was guttural, filled with a primal desperation that had nothing to do with the son I had raised, and everything to do with the corner he had painted himself into. I saw the first blow before I heard it. The tip of the axe blade punched through the center of the upper panel splinters of varnished oak, exploding inward like shrapnel. The wood groaned in protest. I flinched. Not from fear, but from the sheer violence of it. This was my son. The boy I had taught to ride a bike. The boy I had sat with through nightmares. The boy I had secretly supported for years, hoping he would find his way. Now he was hacking through my door like a deranged lumberjack, desperate to get at the money he thought he was owed. Another blow struck lower near the lock. The metal rang out a sharp clang that vibrated through the floorboards. "Open the door," Dad Bradley shouted through the gashes in the wood. "Do not make me do this. You are already doing it, Bradley." I said, my voice calm despite the chaos. You are destroying everything. He did not answer with words. He answered with another swing. The axe head buried itself deep into the frame near the hinges. He wrenched it free, the wood screeching and cracking. I watched the destruction with a detached clinical eye. As an engineer, I knew exactly how much force the door could withstand. I knew the yield point of the hinges. I knew the sheer strength of the deadbolt. It would hold for another minute, maybe two. But as a father, the structural failure I was witnessing was far more devastating. Megan was cheering him on. Her voice was manic. Hit it again, honey. Break it down. He is trying to ruin us. The greed in the air was palpable, thick enough to choke on. They were not breaking in to check on my health. They were not worried about a senile old man. They were terrified that the bank accounts were being frozen. They were terrified that their golden parachute was being set on fire. They were breaking in to stop me from saving myself. Another massive blow struck the center of the door, splitting the panel from top to bottom. A hand reached through the hole, fumbling blindly for the lock. It was Bradley's hand. I recognized the class ring I had bought him for graduation. He was clawing at the metal, desperate to turn the thumb turn. I stood my ground. I did not retreat. I wanted to see them. I wanted to look them in the eye when they finally broke through. I wanted them to see that I was not afraid. With a final ear-splitting crack, the wood around the deadbolt shattered. The door swung inward, hanging crookedly on one twisted hinge. Bradley stood in the doorway, chest heaving, sweat dripping from his forehead. He held the fire axe in both hands, his knuckles white. His eyes were wide, wild, and bloodshot. He looked like a stranger. He looked like a madman. Behind him, Megan peered over his shoulder, her face twisted into a sneer of triumph. Hank and Linda lurked in the shadows like vultures waiting for the kill. "You are insane," Bradley panted, lowering the axe but not dropping it. "You locked yourself in here like a child." I looked at the ruined door. I looked at the axe in his hands. "I locked myself in here to protect myself from criminals," I said. "And it looks like I was right to do so." Megan pushed past Bradley, stepping over the splintered wood. She marched into the room, her heels clicking sharply on the hardwood floor. She looked around frantically, her eyes darting to the safe, then to the computer screens, then to the papers on my desk. "Where is it?" she demanded. "Where is the phone? Who did you call?" "I called my lawyer," I said, "and I called the authorities." "You are lying," she spat. She lunged for the desk, grabbing the phone base and ripping the cord from the wall. "You are just trying to scare us. You are a lonely, pathetic old man, and you are going to do exactly what we say." She turned to Hank. "Get the chair. Tie him up if you have to. We are not leaving until he signs those papers." The mask was completely off now. There was no more pretense of family, no more fake concern. This was a robbery, plain and simple. It was a home invasion perpetrated by the people who were supposed to love me. Bradley stepped fully into the room, dragging the axe behind him. The metal head scraped against the floor, leaving a deep gouge in the finish. "Dad, just sign the papers," he pleaded, his voice swinging wildly between aggression and begging. "Just give us the residency. Give us the power of attorney. We can forget this happened. We can fix the door." "Fix the door," I repeated. "You think you can fix this? You just took an axe to your childhood home, Bradley. You took an axe to your father's safety. There is no fixing this." Hank entered the room. He had dropped the pretense of being the jovial father-in-law. He looked hard and dangerous. He was a man who had nothing left to lose, a cornered animal who realized his escape route was blocked. "Grab him," Hank ordered Bradley. "Stop talking and grab him. We need to get him sedated before he makes any more noise." Sedated. The word hung in the air, cold and clinical. I looked at Megan. She was rummaging through her oversized purse. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear, from adrenaline. She pulled out a small zippered case. I recognized it. It was a diabetic travel kit. But Megan wasn't diabetic. She unzipped it and pulled out a syringe. It was already loaded, the clear liquid inside catching the light from the desk lamp. "I told you he would be difficult," she said to Hank, her voice trembling with excitement. "That is why I brought the insurance." My own daughter-in-law stood there in my study holding a loaded syringe ready to drug me into submission. They were not just going to bully me. They were going to chemically lobotomize me. Bradley looked at the syringe, then at me. For a second, I thought he might stop her. I thought the sight of a needle meant for his father might wake him up from his trance, but he didn't move. He just gripped the handle of the axe tighter and looked away. "Do it," he whispered. "Just do it fast." I realized then that I was truly alone in that room. The son I loved was dead, killed by his own weakness and greed. The man standing before me was just another accomplice. I squared my shoulders. I was 73 years old, but I was a Sullivan. We built things that lasted, and we did not crumble under pressure. "Come and get me then," I said, and they charged. The room erupted into chaos as they surged forward, a tide of greed and desperation crashing against the shores of my solitude. Megan was the first to reach me, her movements fueled by a manic energy that bordered on hysteria. She lunged across the mahogany desk, her manicured nails digging into my wrist as she snatched the landline receiver from my hand before I could even pretend to dial another number. She ripped the cord from the wall with a violent jerk, sending the base of the phone clattering to the hardwood floor. "You are done talking," she shrieked, her face inches from mine twisted into a mask of pure venom. "You are done making calls. You are done controlling us." I did not fight her. I let the phone go. It was a decoy anyway, a prop in a play that was reaching its final act. But the physical violation was shocking. This was the woman who had sat at my table for Thanksgiving dinner, the woman who had pretended to be a loving mother to my grandson, now looking at me with the eyes of a cornered animal ready to bite. Before I could stand, Hank was on me, and this was the moment the charade truly ended. The bumbling, slightly overweight father-in-law, who liked to tell bad jokes and drink my wine, vanished. In his place was a man who knew exactly how to handle a physical confrontation, a man who had clearly spent time on the wrong side of the law. He did not just grab me, he neutralized me. He spun me around with surprising strength, his arm locking around my throat in a chokehold that was tight enough to restrict my air, but not enough to kill me. He forced me down into my leather executive chair, the same chair where I had designed skylines and bridges. "Grab his arms," Hank barked at Bradley. "Do not just stand there, you useless idiot. Grab his arms and hold them to the armrests." I looked at my son. Bradley was trembling, the fire axe still lying on the floor where he had dropped it. He looked at me, then at Hank, then at Megan. He was at a crossroads. One path led back to decency, back to his father. The other path led further into the abyss. He chose the abyss. "I am sorry, Dad," he whispered, his voice breaking as he stepped forward. He grabbed my left wrist and pinned it to the chair. His hands were sweaty and cold. "I am so sorry, but we have no choice. You backed us into a corner. You always have a choice, Bradley." I managed to rasp out against the pressure of Hank's arm. "You are choosing to be a criminal." "Shut him up," Megan snapped. "Linda, get the ties." Linda, the woman who had been admiring my art collection minutes earlier, reached into her oversized handbag. She pulled out a pack of heavy-duty plastic zip ties. They had come prepared. This was not a spontaneous argument. This was a kidnapping kit. She tossed them to Hank. He worked with terrifying speed and practice. He zipped my wrists to the wooden arms of the chair, the plastic biting deep into my skin. Then he secured my ankles to the legs of the desk. I was trapped in my own sanctuary, bound to the furniture I had owned for 30 years by the people I had invited into my home. Hank stepped back, wiping sweat from his forehead. He looked down at me with a cold, calculating stare. "Now you are going to listen to us, George," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "No more games. No more lawyers. Just us and you, Megan stepped forward, clearing a space on my desk by sweeping my architectural drawings onto the floor. She placed a single crisp document in front of me. It was a durable power of attorney. I read the header upside down. It granted Bradley Sullivan and Megan Sullivan full, unrestricted control over all my assets, real estate bank accounts, and medical decisions effective immediately upon my incapacitation. And right next to the document, she placed the syringe. I looked at the needle, then at Megan. "You are going to kill me," I said calmly, analyzing the situation like an engineering problem. "You are going to overdose me and claim I had a heart attack." "No," Megan said, smiling a thin, cruel smile. "That would be too messy. Too many questions. An autopsy might show foul play. We need you alive, George. At least for a little while." She picked up the syringe and tapped it, flicking a small air bubble to the top. "This is a cocktail," she explained, as if sharing a recipe. "A heavy dose of sedatives mixed with a muscle relaxant. It is going to knock you out cold within 3 minutes. When the paramedics arrive, you will be unresponsive. Your speech will be slurred. You will be drooling. Your limbs will be limp." Hank chimed in, his voice smooth and practiced. "We will tell them you had a stroke. A massive sudden stroke brought on by the stress of the holiday. It happens all the time to men your age. Very tragic. And once you are in the hospital declared mentally incompetent due to the stroke," Megan continued, "we will present this document. We will say you signed it this morning when you were feeling unwell, just in case something happened. A moment of clarity before the end." I looked at the signature line. It was blank. "I will never sign that," I said. "You do not have to," Hank said, leaning in close, his breath smelling of my expensive scotch. "You are going to be unconscious, George. We just need your hand. We will press your thumb onto your phone to unlock your banking apps and transfer the liquid cash. Then we will wrap your hand around a pen and guide your signature on this paper. It will look shaky. It will look like the signature of a sick man, which is exactly what the judge will expect to see." The plan was monstrous in its detail. They were not just stealing my money. They were stealing my agency, my mind, and my identity. They were going to trap me in a medical nightmare, medicating me into a vegetable state so they could drain my accounts dry while playing the grieving family at my bedside. Linda spoke up from the doorway, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and greed. "We need to hurry." He said he called someone. "What if the police are coming?" "Let them come," Megan said, her eyes never leaving mine. "By the time they get here, Dad will be on the floor having a medical emergency. We will be the distraught family trying to save him. Who are they going to believe? The loving son and daughter-in-law, or the confused old man who cannot even speak his own name?" She moved toward me, the needle glinting in the dim light of the study. "Roll up his sleeve," she ordered Bradley. My son hesitated. He looked at my arm, the arm that had carried him on my shoulders, the arm that had thrown baseballs to him in the backyard. "Bradley, do not do this," I said, my voice steady. "Once that needle goes in, there is no turning back. This is assault. This is attempted murder." Megan glared at him. "Do it, Bradley. Do you want to go to jail for the money laundering? Do you want the mob to find you? This is the only way out. We need his money to pay them off. We need his money to run." Bradley squeezed his eyes shut. A tear leaked out and rolled down his cheek. "I am sorry, Dad," he whispered again. He reached out and grabbed the sleeve of my flannel shirt. He pulled it up, exposing the pale skin of my upper arm. I felt the cold air hit my skin. I looked at the three of them. Hank holding me down. Bradley exposing my vein. Megan raising the weapon. It was a tableau of betrayal so profound it felt biblical. "You forgot one thing," I said, looking straight at Megan. "What is that?" she asked, pausing with the needle inches from my skin. "I am not the only one who knows," I said. "My brother Leonard has a live feed of this room." Megan froze. She looked up at the corners of the room, scanning the bookshelves, the ceiling, the light fixtures. "You are lying," she hissed. "There are no cameras here. We checked." "You checked for visible cameras," I corrected her. "You did not check for the pinhole lens inside the motion detector. You did not check for the microphone in the desk lamp." I nodded toward the small black sensor in the corner of the room. A tiny red light was blinking. It had been blinking the entire time. "Leonard is recording everything I said. The audio, the video, the confession. He has you explaining the drugs. He has you planning the fake stroke. He has Hank talking about the forgery." Hank released his grip on my shoulder slightly. He looked at the sensor, then back at me. His face went pale. "Is he bluffing?" he asked Megan, his voice losing its tough guy edge. "He has to be bluffing." Megan screamed, but her hand was shaking now, the needle wavering in the air. "Just do it. Stick him. Once he is out, we can find the camera and destroy it." She lunged forward, aiming the needle at my arm. "No," Bradley shouted. He let go of my sleeve and grabbed Megan's wrist, stopping the needle just before it pierced my skin. Bradley let go. Megan shrieked, struggling against him. "We have to finish this. He is recording us." "Megan," Bradley yelled, his eyes wide with panic. "If he is telling the truth, we are adding assault with a deadly weapon to everything else. We are digging our own graves." "You coward," she spat, trying to wrench her hand free. "You are going to let us all go down because you are scared of a blinking light." "It is not just a light," I said, my voice cutting through their panic. "Listen." The room went silent. At first there was only the sound of their heavy breathing. But then from the distance, growing louder with every second, came the sound I had been waiting for. Sirens. Not one siren. Many. A chorus of wails rising and falling, getting closer and closer. Hank ran to the window. He peered through the blinds. "Oh God," he whispered. "It is not just the police. There are black vans. There are tactical teams. They are surrounding the driveway." Megan dropped the syringe. It hit the floor and rolled under the desk. She looked at me, and for the first time the mask of the superior predator shattered completely, revealing the terrified child beneath. "What did you do?" she whispered. "I did not do anything," I replied, leaning back in my chair as much as the zip ties would allow. "I just activated the plan." The sound of boots pounding on the stairs echoed through the house. The front door had been breached. "Police, put your hands in the air," a voice boomed from the hallway. I looked at my son. He was backing away from me, his hands raised in surrender, tears streaming down his face. "It is over, Bradley," I said. And then the room was filled with men in body armor, and the game was finally truly up. The sirens outside were a chaotic symphony of wails rising and falling, in a dissonance that usually signaled salvation. But in this airless room felt like the final countdown to a catastrophe. The red and blue strobe lights from the tactical units on the lawn were already flashing against the ceiling, cutting through the gloom of the study like disco lights at a funeral. But instead of surrendering, instead of dropping to their knees and begging for mercy, my family did the one thing I had not calculated in my engineering models. They doubled down. Panic is a funny thing. In rational men, it triggers a flight response. In predators who realize the trap has snapped shut, it triggers a frenzy to kill the bait. Hank tightened his grip on my shoulders. His fingers dug into my trapezius muscles with bruising force, pinning me against the leather of my chair. He wasn't looking at the window anymore. He was looking at Megan. "We are out of time," he barked, his voice rough with adrenaline. "If they come in here and he is talking, we are going to prison for 20 years. If he is unconscious, we control the narrative. We are just a family dealing with a medical emergency. Do it, Megan. Do it now." Megan stepped closer. Her face was pale, slick with sweat, her makeup streaked. She looked deranged. She held the syringe like a dagger. The needle pointed directly at my neck. She wasn't looking for a vein in my arm anymore. She was going for the jugular or the muscle anywhere to get the cocktail into my system fast. Bradley stood frozen near the shattered doorframe, the fire axe at his feet. He was vibrating, his hands clenching and unclenching. He looked like a man watching a train wreck he had caused, but refused to look away from. I did not struggle against the zip ties. I knew the tensile strength of that plastic. It would not break. Instead, I used the only weapon I had left. I looked at my son. I locked eyes with him, ignoring the needle hovering inches from my throat. I ignored Hank's foul breath in my ear. I focused entirely on the boy I had raised, the man who was now letting wolves devour his father. "Bradley," I said, my voice low and steady, cutting through the panic in the room. "Look at me." He didn't want to. He tried to look at the floor, at the wall, at anything but me. But the weight of my stare dragged his gaze back. "You are going to let them do this?" I asked. "You are going to stand there and watch your wife drug your father? You are going to let them turn me into a vegetable so you can pay off your gambling debts?" Bradley flinched as if I had slapped him, his face twisted in a mixture of shame and fury. "It is not like that," he stammered. "It is not. We are not hurting you. We are just... We need time." "You are killing me," I corrected him. "Maybe not today, maybe not with a bullet. But you are erasing me. You are taking my mind. You are taking my life. And for what? For money. For a lie." Megan hissed through her teeth. "Shut him up, Bradley. Stop listening to him." But I kept my eyes on him. "I paid your rent for 2 years, Bradley. I paid your payroll. I protected you from the Russo family. I did everything a father could do except go to jail for you. And this is how you repay me, by holding the door while they stick a needle in my neck." Bradley's face crumbled. For a second I thought he might break. I thought he might rush forward, tackle Megan, cut the ties. I saw the conflict raging behind his eyes, the war between his conscience and his cowardice. But then he remembered the debts. He remembered the threats from the loan sharks. He remembered the life of unearned luxury he was terrified to lose. The weakness won. He turned his back on me. He physically rotated his body so he was facing the hallway, staring at the blank wall. "You forced me, Dad," he said. His voice muffled and thick with self-pity. "You did this. You sat on millions of dollars while I struggled. You watched me drown, and you did nothing. You judged me. You made me feel small." He clenched his fists, his back still turned to his father's execution. "I need the money," he whispered. "I need it. If I don't get it, I'm dead anyway. So just be quiet. Let them do it. It will be over soon." There it was, the abdication, the final betrayal. He didn't just wash his hands of it like Pontius Pilate, he blamed the man on the cross. Hank laughed a short, cruel bark. "Daddy's boy grew up," he sneered. "Hold him still. Here she comes." Megan lunged. She didn't hesitate this time. The hesitation was gone, replaced by the terrifying clarity of survival instinct. She needed me silent. She needed me incapacitated before the boots on the stairs reached the second floor. She grabbed my hair with her free hand, yanking my head back to expose the side of my neck. I felt the cold plastic of the syringe barrel against my skin. I gritted my teeth. I would not scream. I would not give them that satisfaction. "Just relax, George," she whispered, her breath hot and frantic against my face. "It is just a little nap. When you wake up, you won't remember any of this. You won't remember that your son hates you. You won't remember that you lost." She positioned the needle. I could see the bevel of the steel tip, a tiny silver eye of death. I looked past her at the ceiling. I thought about my wife. I thought about the skyscrapers I had built, steel and concrete structures that scraped the clouds. I thought about the legacy I had tried to build, and how it had all come down to this dirty, desperate moment in a room that smelled of fear and old paper. Do it, Megan shrieked. They are on the stairs. I felt the sharp prick of the needle breaking the skin of my neck, a tiny sting that signaled the beginning of the end. I did not close my eyes. I kept them open wide and accusing. I wanted this to be the last thing she saw before her world ended. I wanted my face etched into her nightmares forever. Downstairs, the front door didn't just open, it disintegrated. The sound was like a thunderclap inside the house, a massive concussive boom that shook the floorboards beneath us. It was followed immediately by the shouting of voices that did not belong to family. Federal agents, clear left, clear right, go, go, go. The heavy thud of tactical boots hit the staircase. They were coming up fast. They sounded like a freight train. Megan flinched. The needle jerked in my neck, scratching but not plunging deep. She pulled it back instinctively, her eyes darting to the open door of the study. Hurry! Hank roared, his grip on me tightening until I thought my collarbone would snap. Stick him, push the plunger. We can say he was already unconscious. She brought the needle down again, her hand shaking violently. She was sobbing now, tears of pure terror streaming down her face, mixing with the red marks where she had scratched herself. I can't find the vein, she cried. He is moving too much. Just stab him anywhere, Hank yelled. The muscle. Just get it in him. She raised her arm for a blind strike, a stabbing motion meant to bury the needle in my shoulder. Bradley turned around. He looked at the scene, his father tied to a chair, his wife about to stab him like a horror movie villain. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He was a spectator at his own damnation. The boots reached the landing. Police, drop the weapon. The voice was amplified, booming, commanded by a man who was used to being obeyed. Megan froze, the needle hovering inches from my skin. She looked at the door. A red laser dot appeared on her chest, right over her heart. Then another on her forehead. Then a third laser dot appeared on Hank's temple. Drop it, or we shoot, the voice commanded again. Megan looked at me one last time. In that fraction of a second, I saw her weigh her options. She could plunge the needle in, try to finish the job, try to claim insanity. Or she could drop it and try to claim coercion. She looked at the laser on her chest. She looked at the needle. And then the room was flooded with black uniforms and the smell of gun oil, and the needle clattered to the floor, rolling harmlessly away under the desk as the wolves were finally surrounded by the hounds. The sharp tip of the needle had just broken the surface of my skin, a mosquito bite that promised oblivion when I finally moved my right knee. It was a small movement imperceptible to the vultures surrounding me, but it was the only movement that mattered. My knee pressed upward against the underside of the mahogany desk, finding the small rubberized button I had installed 3 years ago. I had originally put it there in case of a medical emergency, a direct line to a private security firm, but after Leonard had briefed me on the threat level, I had reprogrammed it. I pressed it hard. The result was not a polite chime. It was a sonic detonation. High-frequency strobe lights hidden in the cornices of the ceiling erupted, transforming the dim study into a blinding, chaotic disco of white lightning. At the same time, a 120-decibel siren shrieked from the walls. It was a sound designed to disorient, to panic, and to bring an attacker to their knees. Megan screamed, dropping the syringe as she clamped her hands over her ears. Hank staggered back, releasing his grip on my shoulder, his face contorted in pain and confusion. The sudden sensory overload shattered their focus, breaking the spell of their violence. And then the room was breached. The men in the hallway did not just walk in. They flowed into the room like a black tide of inevitable justice. These were not local beat cops. These were federal tactical agents moving with the terrifying efficiency of a machine built for war. Federal agents, get down! The command roared over the siren. Hank tried to turn, tried to raise the crowbar in a pathetic reflex of defense, but he never got the chance. A heavy ballistic shield slammed into him, knocking the wind out of his lungs and sending him crashing into my bookshelves. He crumpled to the floor, wheezing, surrounded by fallen engineering manuals. Megan was backing away, stumbling over her own feet, her eyes wide and blinded by the strobes. She tripped over the fire axe Bradley had dropped and fell hard, hitting her hip against the corner of the desk. She curled into a ball, sobbing hysterically. Bradley was already on his knees, his hands laced behind his head, facing the wall. He knew the drill. He had seen enough movies to know that when men with assault rifles enter a room, you make yourself small. He was weeping openly, a low keen of terror that was lost under the wail of the siren. Then the siren cut out abruptly, leaving a ringing silence that was somehow louder than the noise. Into that silence walked my brother. Leonard did not look like a soldier. He looked like exactly what he was, a retired accountant who knew where every skeleton was buried. He was wearing his old trench coat and a fedora, rain dripping from the brim. But in his hand, he held a standard-issue Glock, held with the casual familiarity of a man who had spent 30 years chasing bad men down dark alleys. He stepped over the debris of the doorframe. He walked past the cowering form of my son. He walked past Megan, who was shivering on the floor. He stopped in front of Hank, who was trying to push himself up from the pile of books. Leonard leveled the gun at Hank's chest. "Stay down, you piece of trash," Leonard said. His voice was calm, cold, and absolute. Hank froze. He looked up at the gun, then at Leonard's face. He saw no mercy there. "I did not do anything." Hank stammered, blood trickling from his nose where the shield had hit him. "We were just checking on him. He was having a stroke." Leonard did not even blink. I watched the live feed, Hank. I saw the needle. I heard you tell your daughter to stick him in the muscle. You are done lying. 2 FBI agents moved in on Hank, zip tying his hands behind his back with the efficiency that mocked the amateur way Hank had tied me up. They hauled him to his feet. Another agent moved to Megan. She flinched as he grabbed her wrist, pulling her up. "My baby!" She screamed, suddenly remembering the son she had abandoned at daycare to commit a felony. "I have a son. You cannot arrest me." "You should have thought about Leo before you tried to murder his grandfather," the agent said, snapping the cuffs on her wrists. I sat there in my chair, the plastic ties still digging into my skin, watching the dismantling of my family. It was a surgical procedure. The tumor was being removed. Leonard holstered his weapon and walked over to me. He pulled a knife from his pocket. "Hold still, George," he said gently. He cut the tie on my left wrist, then my right. The plastic snapped away, and the blood rushed back into my hands, bringing a painful pins and needles sensation. He knelt down and cut the ties on my ankles. I rubbed my wrists, looking at the red welts the ties had left. They would bruise. They would fade. But the memory of my son holding me down while I was bound would never fade. "Are you okay?" Leonard asked, looking at the cut on my forehead and the pinprick on my neck where the needle had scratched me. "I am alive," I said. My voice sounded raspy, foreign to my own ears. I stood up. My legs were shaky, but they held. I was a Sullivan. We stood. I walked over to Bradley. He was still on his thighs facing the wall, sobbing into the plaster. An agent was standing over him, waiting for the order to cuff him. "Bradley," I said. He flinched, but did not turn around. "Dad, please," he choked out. I did not want to. They made me. I looked down at the back of his head. I remembered the day he was born. I remembered holding him, thinking I would die to protect him. And in a way I had. I had killed the part of myself that loved him unconditionally so that the rest of me could survive. "Stand up," I said. He slowly turned around and stood up. He would not look me in the eye. He looked at his shoes. He looked at the handcuffs hanging from the agent's belt. "You are going to with these men," I told him. "You are going to tell them everything about the Russo family. You are going to tell them about the money laundering. You are going to tell them about the identity theft." He nodded, tears dripping off his nose. "And Bradley," I added, my voice dropping to a whisper that only he could hear. "Do not ever call me Dad again." My son died the moment you picked up that axe." The agent spun him around and cuffed him. The metallic click was the period at the end of a sentence I had been writing for 38 years. I watched them march him out. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. A hollow man who had finally collapsed under the weight of his own weakness. Leonard put a hand on my shoulder. "The ambulance is outside," he said. "You need to get checked out. That cut needs stitches, and we need to make sure there are no drugs in your system." "I am fine, Leonard," I said, brushing him off. "I do not need a doctor. You need to document the injuries." George Leonard insisted, reverting to his investigator mode. "For the trial. We need photos of the wrists, the head, the neck. We need a toxicology screen to prove there was nothing in your system until they tried to put it there. This is evidence." He was right. It was always about the evidence. I walked out of the study, stepping over the shattered remains of my door. I walked down the hallway past the vintage fire axe lying on the floor, its red paint chipped. I walked down the stairs. The foyer was full of police. The front door was gone, completely destroyed by the battering ram. The cold November wind was blowing into the house, swirling the dead leaves across the marble floor. It was fitting. The house had been breached. The sanctuary was violated. But the rot was gone. I walked out onto the front porch. The driveway was a sea of flashing lights. The neighbors were out standing on their lawns watching the spectacle. Mrs. Higgins from next door was filming with her phone. I saw them putting Hank and Linda into the back of a black SUV. Linda was screaming about her rights, about calling her senator. Hank was silent, staring at the ground, a defeated man. I saw them putting Megan into a squad car. She was thrashing, kicking at the window, screaming my name, screaming that I was the devil. And I saw Bradley sitting in the back of another car, his head bowed, his shoulders shaking. Leonard stood beside me on the porch, lighting a cigarette. He offered me one. I haven't smoked in 20 years, but I took it. "Happy Thanksgiving, George," he said, exhaling a plume of blue smoke into the cold air. I took a drag. The smoke burned my lungs, a sharp, cleansing pain. I looked at the flashing lights. I looked at the ruin of my family. I looked at the empty gray sky. "We have a lot of work to do," I said. "Yeah," Leonard agreed. "But the hard part is over. The rats are in the trap." I watched the cars drive away one by one, taking my past with them. The silence returned to the street. It was a heavy, lonely silence, but it was clean. I turned back to my broken house. It would need repairs. It would need a new door. It would need new locks. But the foundation I knew was still strong. And now, for the first time in a long time, it was mine again. The silence in the living room was absolute, broken only by the hum of the portable projector fan and the occasional metallic clink of handcuffs shifting as four people struggled to find comfort on the hardwood floor. It was a tableau that would have looked ridiculous if the stakes had not been life and death. My family, or what was left of it, was kneeling in a jagged line in front of the fireplace like penitents at a particularly violent altar. Hank and Linda were on the left, their expensive clothes rumpled and dusty from the takedown. Hank's nose was still bleeding, a slow, dark trickle that stained his silk shirt. Linda was weeping silently, her mascara running in black rivers down her cheeks, ruining the facelift she had probably paid for with stolen retirement funds. In the center was Megan. She was not crying anymore. She was vibrating, with a mixture of rage and terror, her eyes darting around the room, looking for an exit that did not exist. The tactical team had secured the perimeter. The FBI agents stood by the doors, arms crossed, impassive as statues, and on the right was Bradley. My son. He was slumped forward, his forehead resting on the floor in a posture of total defeat. He looked like a man whose soul had simply evaporated, leaving behind a hollow shell of designer clothing and bad decisions. I stood in front of them. I had taken a moment in the powder room to wash the rest of the dried blood from my face and straighten my tie. I put on my suit jacket, buttoning it with deliberate slowness. I was not a victim anymore. I was not a hostage. I was the chairman of the board, and this was the final shareholder meeting. Leonard stood to my side, leaning against the mantelpiece. He held a remote control in his hand. He nodded at me, a silent signal that the presentation was loaded. I cleared my throat. The sound echoed in the high-ceilinged room, making Linda flinch. "Look up," I said. My voice was not loud, but it carried the acoustic authority of a man used to commanding construction sites. "All of you, look up." Bradley slowly raised his head. His eyes were red-rimmed and empty. Megan glared at me, a defiance that was rapidly crumbling into panic. "You wanted to know who I was," I said, pacing slowly in front of them. "You wanted to know what I had. You spent months digging through my trash, hacking my emails, snooping in my medicine cabinet. You wanted the truth." I gestured to Leonard. He clicked the remote. A beam of white light cut through the dim room, projecting a crisp, high-definition image onto the pale wall above the sofa. It was not a family photo. It was a digital copy of a federal indictment from the Southern District of Florida. The name Henry Hank Miller was highlighted in yellow. Hank let out a strangled noise, a whimper that died in his throat. "You told me you were entrepreneurs," I said, looking down at my in-laws. "You told me you were in a rough patch. But the United States Department of Justice disagrees. They call it a Ponzi scheme." Leonard clicked the remote again. A spreadsheet appeared. It was a list of names, ages, and dollar amounts. Evelyn Baker, 82 years old, lost $40,000. Thomas Wright, 91 years old, lost $110,000. Martha Diaz, 78 years old, lost her home. "You did not just steal money," I said, my voice hardening. "You stole the last years of peace from people who worked their whole lives to earn it. You targeted veterans. You targeted widows. You are not businessmen. You are vultures." Linda sobbed louder. "We were going to pay them back," she wailed. "It was just an investment strategy. The market turned against us." "Save it for the jury, Linda," I said coldly. I walked over to Megan. She was staring at the screen, her mouth slightly open. She was not looking at the victims. She was looking at the dollar amounts. Even now, facing prison, she was calculating the take. "You brought these people into my house," I said to her. "You knew they were fugitives. You knew they were on the run. And you tried to turn my home into a harbor for criminals. That makes you an accessory after the fact, Megan. That is a federal crime. 5 years minimum." "I do not care about them," she hissed, jerking her head toward her parents. "I did not know about the fraud. I just wanted my inheritance. I wanted what belongs to Bradley." "Ah, yes," I said. "The inheritance. The golden goose you were so desperate to kill." I signaled Leonard again. The screen flickered and changed. This time it displayed a bank account summary. It was not Bradley's account. It was mine. The one I kept in the Cayman Islands Trust. The one connected to the patent royalties. The balance was displayed in bold, black numbers. $18,422,000.16. The air left the room. It was a physical sensation, a vacuum created by the sudden intake of breath from 4 people simultaneously. Bradley's eyes went wide, so wide they looked like they might pop out of his skull. He stared at the number. He blinked and stared again. He looked at me, then back at the wall. "Dad," he whispered, his voice trembling. Is that real?" I nodded. "It is real, son. It is the accumulation of 30 years of royalties from the Sullivan Tensile Node. Every time a skyscraper is built in a hurricane zone, I get paid. Every time a bridge is reinforced, I get paid." I clicked the remote myself this time. A new slide appeared. It was a list of monthly deposits. October, $145,000. September, $152,000. August, $148,000. Megan made a sound like a dying animal. It was a keen of pure agony. She was looking at the numbers and doing the math. She was realizing that the poverty she had mocked, the frugality she had despised, was a choice, not a necessity. You have $18 million, she stammered. And you drive a Ford truck. You clip coupons. You made us live in that shoebox apartment while you were sitting on this. I did not make you do anything. I snapped, my voice cracking like a whip. You chose to live beyond your means. You chose to lease cars you could not afford. You chose to gamble. I walked closer to Bradley. He was mesmerized by the screen, by the zeros that represented the life he could have had. I was waiting, Bradley, I said softly. I was waiting for you to grow up. I was waiting for you to show me that you could build something of your own. I was waiting for you to be a man of character. I pointed to the screen. This was yours, son, all of it. The trust was set up in your name. It was going to vest on your 40th birthday, 2 years from now. 2 years from... Bradley began to weep. It was an ugly, snotty crying, the sound of a man watching his winning lottery ticket burn to ash. 2 years, he choked out. Just 2 years. Yes, I said. But you could not wait. You had to have it now. You had to steal. You had to launder money for the mob. You had to pick up an axe. Leonard clicked the remote one last time. The screen went black, then a new document appeared. It was a live feed of a document being digitally signed. This is a revocation of trust, I explained. I signed it 5 minutes before I came in here. The Bradley Sullivan Trust is dissolved. The funds have been transferred. Transferred where Megan shrieked, trying to lunge forward, but being held back by an agent. Where is the money, George? It is our money. It is for Leo. It is not your money, I corrected her. It never was. And as for Leo, do not worry. I set up a separate educational trust for him. It is controlled by an independent executor. You will never touch a dime of it. Not for his tuition. Not for his clothes. And certainly not for your bail. I turned back to Bradley. The rest of it, I said. The 18 million. I donated it. Donated it? Bradley gasped. To who? To the victims, I said, pointing at Hank and Linda. I set up a restitution fund for the elderly people your in-laws defrauded, and the rest goes to the Firefighters' Widows and Orphans Fund. Since you seem so fond of fire axes, I thought it was appropriate. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of total ruin. They were not just arrested. They were bankrupt. They were destitute. They had gambled everything on a hostile takeover, and they had lost even the clothes on their backs. Hank looked at the floor, his arrogance finally completely gone. You vindictive son of a bitch, he muttered. I walked over to him and leaned down until my face was inches from his. I am not vindictive, Hank, I whispered. I am an engineer. I fix problems. And you are a structural defect. I stood up and buttoned my jacket. I looked at the FBI agent in charge. Get them out of my house, I said. As the agents began to haul them up from their knees, the reality of their situation finally hit them. The begging started. Dad, please, Bradley cried, struggling against the agent's grip. I didn't know about the money. I would have waited. I swear I would have waited. Just give me another chance. I can change. I can leave her. It was pathetic. He was bargaining with a ghost. I did not answer him. I turned away. Megan was screaming now, a raw, animalistic sound. You can't do this. I am the mother of your grandson. You are destroying his family. You destroyed his family, I said over my shoulder. I am just cleaning up the wreckage. They dragged them out one by one. Hank and Linda first, heads bowed, shuffling in their expensive shoes. Then Megan kicking and screaming, cursing my name, cursing the day she met my son. And finally, Bradley. He stopped at the doorway looking back at me. His eyes were pleading, searching for any sign of the father who used to catch him when he fell. He found only the man who had survived him. "Goodbye, Bradley," I said. The door closed behind him, leaving me alone in the silent living room with Leonard. The projector hummed in the quiet, a white square of light still shining on the wall, where the evidence of their greed had been exposed. Leonard turned off the projector. The room plunged back into the soft gloom of the late afternoon. "That was brutal," Leonard said quietly. "Effective, but brutal." I walked over to the window and watched the convoy of black vehicles pulling away down the driveway. I watched my son's head disappear into the back of a squad car. I felt a phantom pain in my chest, a cracking sensation where my heart used to be. But I also felt lighter. The rot was gone. The termites had been exterminated. The structure still stood. "It had to be done," I said. Leonard walked over and poured 2 glasses of the expensive wine that Linda had opened. He handed one to me. "To the Sullivan Tensile Node," he said, raising his glass. I looked at the wine. It was dark red, like blood. "To structural integrity," I replied. We drank in silence, listening to the sound of the sirens fading into the distance, leaving my house and my life finally completely empty. I walked out of the house and down the stone steps of the front porch. The cold wind bit through my suit jacket, but I barely felt it. The adrenaline that had sustained me through the confrontation was beginning to fade, replaced by a hollow, aching exhaustion that settled deep in my bones. The driveway was a chaotic sea of flashing red and blue lights, illuminating the faces of my neighbors, who stood in clusters on the sidewalk, whispering and pointing. I ignored them. My focus was entirely on the second squad car in the line where my son sat behind the wire mesh of the rear window. Bradley looked up as I approached. His face was a ruin of snot and tears, his expensive haircut matted with sweat. When he saw me, he lunged toward the glass, his handcuffed hands hitting the window with a dull thud. He was shouting something, mouthing words I could not hear through the soundproof glass. The officer standing by the door looked at me. It was a young man I did not recognize. "He wants to talk to you, Mr. Sullivan," the officer said. "You do not have to. We can take him in right now." I nodded slowly. "Give me a minute." The officer opened the door. The sound of Bradley S. sobbing spilled out into the night air. "Dad." "Thank God," Bradley gasped. Tell them this is a mistake. Tell them I did not know about the needle. I was just scared. I can fix this. I just need a little time." I leaned down, resting my hands on the roof of the car. I looked at him not with anger anymore, but with the clinical detachment of a coroner examining a corpse. "There is no time left, Bradley," I said quietly. "And there is nothing left to fix because I have already dismantled it all." "What do you mean?" he stammered, wiping his nose on his shoulder. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I tapped the screen and held it up so he could see. It was a notification from American Express. "Your platinum card," I said. "The one you used to pay for Megan S. jewelry. The one you used to book the suite in Vegas. You thought it was linked to your company account, right?" Bradley nodded, confusion clouding his eyes. "It was linked to a sub-account of my trust," I explained. "I have been paying the balance in full every month for 5 years. I paid for your clothes. I paid for your dinners. I paid for the gas in your car. I wanted you to feel successful so you would become successful." I swiped the screen. "Account closed." "It is gone, Bradley. I canceled it 10 minutes ago, along with the Visa and the MasterCard. You do not have a credit score anymore. You do not have purchasing power. You cannot even buy a pack of gum." Bradley S.'s face paled. But the company. Phoenix Ventures. The angel investor. He sends the wire on the 1st of the month. I can use that to pay a lawyer. I let out a short, dry laugh. It was a sound void of humor. The angel investor, I repeated. You really believed that, didn't you? You really thought some venture capitalist in Silicon Valley looked at your business plan, which was nothing but buzzwords and smoke, and decided to give you $5,000 a month out of the kindness of his heart. Bradley stared at me, his mouth hanging open. A dawn of horrific realization was creeping into his eyes. It was you, he whispered. It was always me, I said. Phoenix Ventures is a shell company I created to keep you off the street. I was the one paying your office rent. I was the one paying your server fees. I was the one keeping the lights on while you played CEO and laundered money for the mob. I leaned closer, my face inches from his, and I just dissolved it. I cut the wire, Bradley. The transfer scheduled for tomorrow morning has been canceled. The bank account is closed. Your landlord has already been notified that the lease is terminated. Bradley began to shake. He was realizing that the entire infrastructure of his life was an illusion, a stage set I had built and maintained, and that I had just struck the set. But Dad, he pleaded, his voice rising in panic. If the money stops, the Russo family, they will come for me. They will kill me if I do not have their payment. I know, I said. That is why I did the one thing that might actually keep you alive. Although you are not going to like it. I pulled a folded piece of paper from my inside pocket. It was a printout of an email confirmation. I forwarded your ledger to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, I said. Bradley looked at me as if I had just shot him. You called the IRS. I sent them everything, son. The fake invoices. The shell accounts in Cyprus. The washed funds coming back through the casinos. I carbon copied the FBI Financial Crimes Unit. I held the paper up to the glass. The audit starts tomorrow morning at 8 sharp. They are freezing your corporate assets tonight. They are seizing your laptops. They are seizing the Porsche. By sunrise, you will be the subject of a federal RICO investigation. Bradley slumped back against the seat. The fight went out of him instantly. He knew what this meant. The mob could not touch him if he was in federal custody. But his life as a free man was over. He was trading a bullet for a cage. Why, he whispered, tears streaming down his face again. Why would you do that to me? Because it was the only way to stop you, I replied. You were out of control. You were a danger to yourself and to me. You tried to drug your own father, Bradley. You picked up an axe. You crossed a line that can never be uncrossed. I stood up and signaled to the officer. Take him away. Wait, Dad, wait, Bradley screamed, lunging at the door again. What about the inheritance? The trust? You showed me the numbers. $18 million. Just give me a little bit. Just enough to hire a defense attorney. Please, I am your son. I looked at him through the glass one last time. I do not have a son, I said. My son died a long time ago. You are just a bad investment, I finally wrote off. The officer closed the door, cutting off his screams. I watched as the car put it into gear and slowly rolled down the driveway, the red taillights disappearing into the darkness. I stood there in the cold wind, feeling a strange lightness. The burden I had carried for years, the secret weight of supporting a man who despised me, was gone. I had severed the limb to save the body. Leonard walked up beside me. He handed me a glass of whiskey. You okay, George? He asked. I took the glass and took a sip. The burn was grounding. He is bankrupt, I said. He is under federal investigation. He has no home, no car, no money. And he is in a cell. It is better than a casket, Leonard said. Yes, I agreed, but only just. I looked back at the house. The front door was a gaping hole, but the lights were on. It was still standing. The repo truck pulled into the driveway, its yellow lights flashing. The driver, a burly man in a jumpsuit, hopped out and walked toward Bradley's Porsche, parked near the garage. Is that the vehicle? The driver asked, pointing at the sleek black sports car. That is it, I said. Take it. I watched as he hooked up the car. The Porsche. Bradley's pride and joy, the symbol of his fake success, was lifted into the air, its alarm chirping pathetically. It was the final piece of the demolition. The site was cleared. I turned to Leonard. There is one more thing, I said. What is that? Megan, I said. She thinks she has an ace in the hole. She thinks she can use the boy against me. Leonard smiled a cold, hard smile. She is in for a surprise. Yes, I said. Let's go finish this. We walked back into the house, leaving the empty driveway behind us, ready to deliver the final blow to the woman who had orchestrated the entire nightmare. I signaled to the lead federal agent standing by the command vehicle. He raised a hand, and the convoy of squad cars stopped halfway down the driveway, their brake lights bathing the lawn in a blood-red glow. Bring them back, I said, pointing to the cars holding Bradley and Megan. Just for a minute. There is one loose end we need to tie up. The agent hesitated, then nodded. He spoke into his radio. The doors of the cruisers opened. Megan was dragged out first. She was not screaming anymore. She was hyperventilating, her face streaked with mascara, her expensive dress torn at the shoulder. But when she saw me standing on the porch steps, a flicker of her old defiance returned. It was the desperate viciousness of a rat that realizes it is cornered but still has teeth. You cannot do this, George, she shrieked, thrashing against the cuffs. You can take the money, you can take the house, but you will never see Leo again. Never. She planted her feet, screaming at the top of her lungs, making sure every neighbor and every cop could hear her. I am his mother, she yelled. I have custody, and I swear to God I will poison that boy against you. I will tell him you are a monster. I will raise him to hate the name Sullivan. He is the only heir you have, and I will turn him into a weapon that will destroy your legacy. It was her final card. The ace she had been keeping up her sleeve. She knew I loved that boy. She knew that despite everything, I would not want an innocent child to be collateral damage. She thought she could trade access to my grandson for her freedom, or at least for a settlement. Bradley was pulled from the other car. He stood there limp and broken, listening to his wife threaten his father with his son. He looked at me, his eyes pleading, begging me to give in just a little to save his relationship with his boy. She means it, Dad, he croaked. She will do it. Just, can we work something out? For Leo. I looked at them both, the parasitic son and the predator daughter-in-law. They were united by nothing but greed and a child they used as a pawn. I reached into my inside jacket pocket and pulled out a sealed envelope. It was not a legal document. It was a medical one. You are right, Megan, I said, my voice projecting clearly over the wind. Leo is an innocent boy. He deserves better than this. That is why I made sure he would be protected from you. I walked down the steps until I was standing right in front of her. But he is not my heir, I said, and he is not a Sullivan. Megan went still. The color drained from her face, leaving it gray and lifeless. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Bradley frowned, confused. What are you talking about? Of course he is. He is my son. I turned to Bradley. I looked at him with a pity that was almost painful. Do you remember when you had the mumps when you were 12, Bradley? I asked. It was a bad case. You were in the hospital for a week. The doctors told us there might be complications. Bradley shook his head. So what? One of the complications was orchitis, I said. We tested you when you were 18. You are sterile, son. You have been sterile for 20 years. You cannot have children. The silence that fell over the driveway was heavier than the grave. Bradley stared at me, his brain trying to process information that rewrote his entire history. No, he whispered. That is a lie. We went to a fertility clinic. Megan said, I ripped open the envelope. I pulled out the DNA test results Leonard had acquired 2 weeks ago. He had swiped a juice box Leo had discarded and run it against my own DNA profile. 0% probability, I read aloud. No genetic match. I turned the paper so Bradley could see it. Leo is not your son, Bradley, and he is not my grandson. I looked at Megan. She was shaking her head violently, her eyes squeezed shut, as if she could make the truth disappear. Who is he, Megan, I asked. Is it the personal trainer? The one you paid $5,000 to last year from the joint account? Or was it the pool boy? Megan's eyes snapped open. They were filled with pure, unadulterated hate. It does not matter, she spat. He was my ticket. He was the anchor, baby. And you were supposed to be the ATM. You stupid old man, you were just supposed to pay the bills and die. She had admitted it. She had admitted that the child my son adored, the child I had bounced on my knee, was nothing more than a strategic asset in her long con. She had deceived an entire family for 5 years just to secure a payout. The sound that came out of Bradley was not human. It was the howl of a wolf whose leg has been snapped in a trap. You lied to me, he screamed. He lunged. The despair that had paralyzed him vanished, replaced by a blind, murderous rage. He broke free from the officer's grip with a strength I did not know he possessed. He threw himself at Megan, his handcuffed hands raised like a club. You lied to me, he roared, swinging his fists. You made me steal from my father for a kid that isn't even mine. You ruined my life for a lie. He collided with her, knocking her to the pavement. They rolled on the asphalt, a tangle of expensive clothes and handcuffs, screaming and cursing. Megan was shrieking, kicking at him. Bradley was trying to strangle her with his chains. It was the final implosion. The nuclear detonation of the family unit. Officers swarmed them. It took 4 men to pull Bradley off her. He was frothing at the mouth, crying and screaming incoherent threats. Get off me, let me kill her, he yelled as they dragged him back to the car. She is a devil, she is a devil. Megan was hauled up, bleeding from a cut on her lip, her dress ruined. She looked at me, and for the first time she looked truly defeated. Her leverage was gone. Her secret was out. She was not the mother of an heir. She was just a fraud. Get them out of here, I said, turning my back on them. I walked back up the stairs. I did not watch the cars leave this time. I did not need to. I heard the doors slam. I heard the tires squeal. Leonard was waiting for me in the foyer. He held up a bottle of wine. That was the hardest thing you have ever had to do, he said. Yes, I replied. But Leo... Leonard started. I stopped him. I know he is not my blood, Leonard, but I am not going to punish the boy for the sins of the mother. I will pay for his school. I will make sure he has a chance. But he will never know me, and he will never know them. It is the only way to break the cycle. Leonard nodded. I walked into the dining room. The table was still set. The turkey was cold. The broken plate lay on the floor, a jagged shard of white porcelain stained with my blood. I picked it up. It is over, I whispered. I dropped the shard into the trash can. It made a final clinking sound. Then I closed the lid on the trash and on 40 years of my life. The last siren wailed in the distance, fading into the cold November night, like the dying cry of a beast that had finally been put down. The flashing lights that had turned my front lawn into a chaotic carnival were gone, leaving behind only the deep blue shadows of the oak trees and the harsh white glare of the moon. My house, which had vibrated with violence and screaming just an hour ago, was now silent. It was a heavy, profound silence, the kind that settles over a battlefield after the last shot has been fired and the smoke begins to clear. I stood in the center of the foyer, looking at the empty space where the front door used to be. The splintered frame was a jagged maw opening my home to the elements. A few dead leaves skittered across the marble floor, pushed by the wind. I shivered, but not from the cold. I shivered because for the first time in years, I was truly alone. "Let's go inside, George." Leonard said, his voice soft but firm. "It is freezing out here." I nodded and turned away from the ruin of the entrance. We walked back into the dining room. It looked like a freeze frame of a disaster. The turkey sat uncarved in the center of the table, its skin wrinkling as it cooled. The green bean casserole had formed a congealed skin. The shattered pieces of the Lennox plate were still scattered on the floor, a constellation of white and gold shards stained with the memory of my blood. I walked to the head of the table and sat down in my chair. It felt different now. It felt like a throne in an empty kingdom. Leonard grabbed a bottle of wine from the sideboard. It was the expensive Cabernet that Linda had opened, the one she had been guzzling like water. He poured 2 glasses, filling them to the brim. He set one in front of me and took the seat to my right. The seat where Bradley had sat just hours ago, demanding I surrender my dignity. "Drink," Leonard said. "You need it." I picked up the glass. My hand was steady. I looked at the dark red liquid swirling in the crystal. I thought about the years I had saved this bottle, the special occasions I had imagined opening it for. A promotion for Bradley. A graduation for Leo. A quiet anniversary with my wife. I never imagined I would drink it to celebrate the destruction of my family. I raised the glass. "To freedom," I whispered. "To freedom," Leonard echoed. We drank. The wine was rich and complex, with notes of blackberry and oak, but to me it tasted like iron and ash. It tasted like survival. I set the glass down and looked around the room. The walls were lined with portraits. My wife smiling on our wedding day. Bradley as a baby. Bradley graduating college. Bradley holding Leo. They were lies, all of them. Snapshots of a happiness that had never really existed, only a facade built over a foundation of rot. "I need to make a call," I said. Leonard raised an eyebrow. "Now." "It is almost midnight." "It cannot wait," I said. I pulled my phone from my pocket. The screen was cracked from when Megan had knocked it out of my hand, but it still worked. I dialed a number I had saved years ago, a number I had hoped never to use. It rang 4 times before a tired voice answered. "St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital donations line. This is Sarah. How can I help you?" "Sarah." I said, my voice clear and strong. "My name is George Sullivan. I would like to make a donation." "It is a bit late, sir," Sarah said kindly. "You can do this online if you prefer." "No," I said. "I want to do it now. And I want to speak to a director if possible. It is a substantial amount." "How substantial, sir?" $18 million, I said. There was a silence on the other end. A stunned, breathless silence. "Sir, are you serious?" "Dead serious," I said. "I want to establish a fund, the Martha Sullivan Memorial Fund, in honor of my late wife. It will be for the treatment of pediatric cancer. And I want a clause added." "Yes, sir, anything." "No one with the last name Sullivan is ever to be denied care," I said. "And no one with the last name Sullivan is ever to be on the board of directors." I gave her the details of the trust account. I gave her the routing numbers. I authorized the transfer. When I hung up, I felt a physical weight lift from my shoulders. The money, the golden handcuffs that had tethered my son to his greed, was gone. It was no longer a weapon. It was no longer a trap. It was just money doing good in the world instead of rotting in a vault. "You really did it," Leonard said, looking at me with a mixture of awe and sadness. "You gave it all away." "Not all of it," I said. "I kept enough. Enough to fix the door. Enough to pay the heating bill. Enough to buy a good bottle of scotch now and then. That is all I need. I looked at the empty chairs around the table. They are gone, Leonard, I said. Really gone. Yeah, Leonard said. They are, and they are never coming back. I stood up and walked over to the sideboard. I picked up the carving knife and fork. Are you hungry? I asked. Starving, Leonard said. I carved the cold turkey. I put a heap of stuffing on a plate. We ate in silence, the only sound the clinking of silverware and the wind howling through the broken door. It was the best meal I had eaten in years. After dinner, we walked to the front hallway. The contractor Leonard had called was already there, a sleepy-looking man measuring the door frame for a temporary plywood patch. I will handle this, Leonard said. You go upstairs. Get some rest. I looked at my brother. He had saved my life today. He had stood by me when my own flesh and blood had turned on me. Thank you, Leonard, I said. Don't mention it, George. That is what family is for. I walked up the stairs. My legs felt heavy, my body aching from the struggle. I walked down the long hallway past the guest rooms that would never host Hank and Linda, past the nursery that would never see another Sullivan child. I walked into my bedroom and closed the door. I did not turn on the lights. I walked to the window and looked out at the backyard. The snow had started to fall. Big, soft flakes drifting down from the black sky, covering the frozen ground in a blanket of pristine white. It covered the tire tracks of the police cars. It covered the footprints of the tactical team. It covered the scars of the night. It was beautiful. It was clean. I thought about Bradley sitting in a holding cell, probably cold, probably terrified. I felt a pang of grief, a sharp stab of loss for the boy he used to be. But I did not feel guilt. I had done what a father has to do. I had stopped him from becoming a monster. I thought about Megan and her rage. I thought about Hank and his greed. They were just ghosts, now bad dreams that would fade with the morning light. I turned away from the window and looked at the empty bed. My wife's side was still untouched, the pillow perfectly fluffed, just as she liked it. I sat down on the edge of the mattress. The house was quiet. No shouting, no demands, no lies. Just silence. It was a lonely silence, yes. But it was also peaceful. It was the silence of a structure that had weathered the storm and was still standing. I took off my jacket and laid it on the chair. I loosened my tie. I lay down on the bed and pulled the quilt up to my chin. I closed my eyes. For the first time in a long time, I was not afraid of what tomorrow would bring. I was free. And as I drifted off to sleep, listening to the snow fall on the roof, I knew that this Thanksgiving, despite everything, was one I would truly be thankful for. Looking back, I realized that my greatest mistake wasn't hiding my wealth, but thinking I could save my son from his own character. Family is not defined by bloodlines or last names, but by loyalty, integrity, and mutual respect. When you enable toxic people out of obligation, you don't help them. You only sharpen their teeth for the moment they eventually turn on you. I learned that sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is let their child face the consequences of their own actions. A quiet, empty house is infinitely better than a home filled with enemies, and dignity is the only asset that truly matters in the end. If you agree that respect is non-negotiable in any relationship, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories where justice is finally served.